from the All Indiana Podcast Network.
It's time for real conversation about the real issues that affect our communities.
Poverty, education, equality, and more.
This is Real Talk.
Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network. I'm Reverend Charles Harrison, and on this episode, we're going to talk about, has Indianapolis turned the corner when it comes to the record-breaking violence that the city has been experiencing from 2015 to 2024? Is something happening in 2025 that we're seeing a turning of the corner? Let's talk about that on this episode. Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network, and this is Reverend Charles Harrison with you today on my podcast that I do weekly here in Indianapolis. And I'm just coming off of a great day yesterday. Yesterday, I celebrated a birthday. Yesterday was my 65th birthday. I turned 65 yesterday. I want to thank everybody that said that I don't look 65. Thank you so much. You won certainly a lot of brownie points with me by saying that you don't look 65. Somebody said, well, I thought you were going to announce that you was 50 years old, you know, the big announcement yesterday. And that person really gets the thumbs up, you know, saying that I look 50 years old. But certainly God has blessed me over the years, and I feel blessed and I feel fortunate and, you know, to see another year. And I had a chance yesterday to enjoy it with my family and a few friends. And I'm doing more celebrating today. So today I'm going to have dinner with more friends and church members as I celebrate another birthday. But I want to talk about, you know, today what's going on in Indianapolis when it comes to the violent crime numbers in the city. And most of you know I have been doing this in the city of Indianapolis since 1999 when I was a part of a group of pastors that launched an initiative called the Indianapolis 10-Point Coalition. It is a faith-based organization that seeks to address the issue of urban youth violence as it impacts young men of color between the ages of 12 and 24. Primarily, we launched this initiative to address the issues of violence, primarily on the west side of Indianapolis. In the at that time, it was called the United Northwest area, Highland vicinity, Crown Hill neighborhood, Butler Tarkington, and Mapleton Fall Creek. In the late 90s, certainly some of those neighborhoods were some of the leading neighborhoods in the city when it came to violent crimes, particularly homicides that impacted young black males. So I got involved in that. So I've seen a lot. You know, I've seen all of the trends going back from 1999 up until, you know, this year. So I've seen the highs and the lows in the city when it comes to violent crimes. I've seen, you know, what's driving the violence. You know, I've been on the ground when the city was experiencing problems with gangs and cliques that was generated. Basically, the violence was being driven by the drug trafficking in the city. And, you know, I've been in a lot of homicide scenes. I've seen a lot of people killed. I mean, I've just been out there. And, you know, I've seen the highs and lows, you know, from probably 1999 to about 2012. The city averaged about 96 criminal homicides a year and about, I think on the average, it was 114, 115 criminal homicides a year. And at that time, the city was known in Indianapolis as you know, one of the cities that had the best, you know, violence reduction initiatives in the country. We was known for our Weed and Seed initiative in Indianapolis, partnerships with the city, law enforcement, all branches of law enforcement and neighborhoods, grassroots organizations and anti-violence groups. I mean, it was strong in Indianapolis. And I still believe that's one of the strengths of the city. And it was the partnership, back then when you talk about from 1999 to 2012, it was the partnership between the courts, probation, the prosecutor's office, law enforcement, and the community, what I call the village. We worked well together, particularly in areas of the city that we were experiencing the highest level of violence, and together I thought we was doing some remarkable work. I really felt like in 2010, that year when we ended the year with 93 murders that year, criminal homicides, that we could have got that number below 90. I really felt that way. Unfortunately, there were some changes made in the strategy. The City County Council got involved in it and made some adjustments to the crime prevention initiative and dollars. And I've always felt like that was a mistake. I felt like that was a mistake, and maybe they didn't mean to do it that way, but it was a mistake. And I thought that was the beginning of the rise in violent crimes that we started seeing in the city of Indianapolis. We went 2 more years. Went 2 more years with the homicide numbers basically being low in 2011 and 2012, and then by 2013, we started to see a rise in the violent crimes in the city of Indianapolis. So, that was a problem. We started to see a rise, and it was a problem in the city. And I felt like that the city, some of the city elected officials just was not listening to the people on the ground. And I think we play a real important role because we're out there, whether we be grassroots organizations or churches or community centers. We see what's going on in the neighborhoods. We're talking to residents in the neighborhoods on a regular basis. We know who the people are that are most likely are going to be the ones that are either going to be the suspects or the victims of violent crimes. And when you're out there and you're engaging people, you have a feel for what's going on in the streets. And I just felt like for several years, our voices was not being heard. And I think that was one of the mistakes that was made in this city, is that the voices of the people who are out there in the streets, who had the pulse of the neighborhoods, were not being listened to, who could have helped, particularly in those critical years where we were just seeing this surge and escalation in the violence, along with the police officers who, are there 24/7, basically, IMPD. And what, the rank and file officers are seeing on a regular basis, because they're interacting, unfortunately, with people who most likely are involved in some kind of criminal activity, and their voices and the voices of grassroots organizations, community centers, and anti-violence groups like 10 Point and churches, I think our voices are key along with law enforcement. So certainly, in 2015, we broke a criminal homicide record. We did it for about 3 or 4 or 5 years in a row. We have seen from 2015 to 2024 the highest level of violent crimes in the history of the city. But there's some good news. The good news is that in 2025, we have seen a dramatic decline in violent crimes. Particularly, I want to focus on homicides and criminal homicides. Right now, in as of June the 20th, the city's at 62 homicides, and we're at 51 criminal homicides. And this time last year, with criminal homicides, we were at 75. We were certainly near 100 homicides last year at this time. that is a tremendous decline when it comes to homicides and criminal homicides in the city. We're at 62 homicides and 51 criminal homicides. We have not seen these kind of numbers since 2013, when the city ended that year with 142 homicides. That is a dramatic decline, in the area when it comes to homicides in the city. And I'm really pleased with that, because I think we're beginning to see a lot of the things that made the city successful, from about 1999 to 2012. We're beginning to see those things put back in place, and I kind of want to talk about, people ask me all the time, what do you think? What do you think that's different? What do you think that's different this year? And I think we've been trying in the city to get back to some of the things that were successful in the past. Times have changed, and with the changing of time, certainly some of your strategies have to change because things are different. In 2025, it's different from what it was in 2012. So you always have to be able to adjust to the changing environment, in the city. What's going on in these particularly hotspot neighborhoods in the city that tends to drive up the violence up. What I do think that's different, before I get into what I think is really working, is that in 2025, the violence tends to be more widespread than what it used to be going back, 10 or 15 years ago, when it was more concentrated. It was really more concentrated, when you talk about from 1999 to about, 2012, which was, the heydays, of when the city was doing really well through the Wheat and Seed Initiative in addressing the issue of violent crimes back then. And when you saw this phenomenal partnership between law enforcement, all branches of law enforcement in the Indianapolis area, and the courts and the prosecutor's office and probation, working hand in hand with neighborhood groups, grassroots organizations, and anti-violence groups, we saw a lot of success in Indianapolis. And I've always felt, and you have heard me, even during the times of the city experiencing record-breaking violence, that I always felt like that our goal should have been set at getting back to where we were, because I always felt like it was possible that we could get back to where we were between 1999 and 2012. And I believe that this city has potential to even go lower than that. But I always felt at least we could get back to that. And when we were experiencing 200 homicides a year, I was being very critical, because I was not accepting just getting below 200 should have been the goal. That we ought to be pressing to get back at least to where we were prior to 2015, and I want to see us get back to as close as we could to where the city was between 1999 and 2012. I felt like all of the tools that the city used back then were still available to us, that we still could produce those kind of numbers where we could get back under 100 murders a year and 115 or less homicides. I've always felt that way because, I know the dynamics of what reduces violence, and I know the city very well. And I felt like that we could have gotten back there if we would have went back to some of the old strategies and incorporated new strategies for the time that we were now in. There are things that have changed. But so far, we've almost completed 6 months, and we still have, almost a couple of weeks left in June. But the numbers so far look good. Now, that doesn't mean that, from July to the end of December that we won't experience, high levels of violence. But I think right now there are things that are in place that I think are looking very promising for the city this year. I had a conversation with INPD this morning, and right now we're 30% down from where we were last year. And last year we were down from the previous year. So we have been tracking down. And I believe that there are several reasons why, and I want to get into that. What's going on now, and why is the city doing so well now, in 2025 compared to even 2024? And I think there are several things. I really believe, and I've always felt this way, that INPD is one of the best police departments in the country. I've always said that, and I mean that. I travel across the country. I get a chance to work with other police departments across the country that are working with groups like 10 Point, anti-violence groups or grassroots organizations. And I know that in my experience in working with other groups across the country, INPD is one of the best. They're one of the best in the country. They're one of the best at what they do, particularly in their strategies to help address this issue of urban violence. They have a track record of it, and I've been working with INPD now for about 26 years. And no matter who the police chief is and the district commanders, they tend to bring out the best or put the best people in those positions. And they have just had a phenomenal record, in working with the community. I mean, they do. I cannot say anything bad about INPD, even when we have had controversial things that have happened in the city involving an INPD officer. Their willingness to work with the community to try to address the issue has been second to none, in my opinion, in the country. They do well when it comes to the district commanders and working with local groups and coming up with strategies to try to address the problem that is leading to the violence, and they work very closely with the leadership in these hotspot areas across the city. And that has really been helpful because when you're getting buy-in from the neighborhood and the police then are beginning to explain their strategies and kind of giving you an overview of what's going on, then you are familiar and aware as a leader as to what's going on, and then they allow you to give your input. So not only are you receiving information, but you are allowed to give your input, and then together strategies are being put together to address the problem in these neighborhoods. And INPD does an awesome job at that. They really do. And so when we talk about, why are we seeing the reduction in violent crimes, in robberies and those kind of things in the city, is because of the work that INPD is doing on the streets. I see that as 10 Point. I'm out 3 or 4, 5 nights a week, depending on, how busy I am at the church and with my family. But when I am able to get out, I see what they're doing on the streets, firsthand, and they're just doing a remarkable job. So I think what INPD is doing is making a significant impact in the reduction of violent crimes. Why the city now, as of right now, June 20th, 2025, has seen a 30% reduction in violent crimes. I think the second thing is that I think the prosecutor and the courts have done a better job of holding repeat violent offenders accountable. Now, I have been a critic of the prosecutor and of the courts, particularly in the last 4, 5, 6 years. I just felt like that they were not holding repeat violent offenders accountable. And in the work I do and what I see out on the streets, there are certain individuals that we call them hot people or hot groups out there. These are the individuals that are most likely are going to be the suspects and the victims of violent crimes. They have a history of violence. And one of the complaints that I had was that there are certain people that are being arrested by IMPD, but they're right back out on the streets. And I felt like that the prosecutor's office was doing too many sweetheart deals, and the courts was not doing enough to hold these individuals accountable. And I was very, very critical about that, because I know one or two people in a neighborhood can make all the difference in the world if those individuals are the ones that are driving violent crimes in the neighborhood. So that if you remove those individuals, then you reduce the likelihood of violent crimes. But when you have, whether it be a drug dealer or a gang member that is constantly involved, or a young man or young woman, a part of a clique, they're constantly in the middle of violent situations in the neighborhood that leads to either somebody being stabbed, shot or injured, or shot or killed, then those are the individuals that you want off the streets. You don't want them on the streets in your neighborhood, because you know them being on the streets, what it's going to lead to. And there are lots of those kind of individuals in neighborhoods all across the city. So what I was seeing on the street, particularly, 2019, before we had the explosion of violence in 2020, where we started seeing 200 homicides a year and more, was the concern that these repeat violent offenders were not being held accountable. Well, that has changed. That has changed. In 2025, in the 12 hotspot areas that the Indianapolis 10-Point Coalition patrols in partnership with IMPD and other community groups, we have not been seeing those individuals. So one of the things that I concluded is that the courts and the prosecutors was doing a much better job of holding repeat violent offenders accountable, because I have not seen them on the streets in the kind of numbers that we were seeing them on the streets when we were seeing record-breaking levels of violence in the city of Indianapolis. So one of the things that has happened is not just what the police are doing, but number two, the prosecutor's office and the courts are doing a better job of holding repeat violent offenders accountable. That is key. If you're going to reduce violence in these hotspot areas across the city, you have to hold the repeat violent offenders accountable. That is a must. Because if they're not held accountable, then other individuals who may be like-minded, they see that, then what it does is it causes them to begin to act out in violent ways too. When people are being held accountable, then other people know that they're being held accountable, and then it becomes less likely that they're going to continue to be involved in these violent acts. So when you start holding people accountable, then it's a tool that we can use even on the streets as 10-Point to remind individuals that if you're going to be out here acting out and committing violent acts, that you're going to end up in prison. And that is a tool that we have to use to get some people's attention that we're not going to tolerate you terrorizing the neighborhood. So in order for that to work, we have to have the prosecutor's office along with the courts who are supporting that when IMPD arrests them and when community groups are speaking out against them and helping to get people to identify them so that we can get enough on them in order to get them arrested and prosecuted. And that's the goal. But in order to do that, the prosecutor's office and the courts have to do their part. And I thought they were doing it last year, particularly the latter half of 2024, and certainly the first 6 months of 2025, they have done a real good job, I think, of holding repeat violent offenders accountable. The third piece of this is the work of grassroots organizations, community centers, the city, their violence reduction team, and anti-violence groups like 10-Point. There is no silver bullet to reducing violent crimes. There's no one group, no one strategy that's able to do it. It is the village working together. And there are a lot of very good, positive programs in the city of Indianapolis all over, whether it be the east side, the south side, the west side, or the north side of Indianapolis. There are a lot of people out there doing a lot of good stuff. There are people out there that are working with our youth, our adolescents, There are programs out there that are working with ex-offenders, trying to assimilate them and assimilate them back into society, providing wraparound services for them so that they don't have to go back to a life of crime in order to make it. There are businesses that are working with a lot of the community groups to try to provide job opportunities for individuals who have been a part of the judicial system. And I think that's key. One of the strengths of Indianapolis is our grassroots organizations, anti-violence groups, churches, community centers, and the work that we do to reduce violence. I think that Indianapolis has one of the best. And what the city is doing with their violence reduction initiative is good. I know a couple young people that some of their violence interrupters and coaches and street workers work with, and they did a good job. After the young people got in trouble, their initiative worked with them to try to put them on a pathway of success. That's good. We need that. We need that. We need that. Once kids get in trouble and they haven't committed an act that would cause them to be in prison yet, we got to intervene in their life so that they don't go to the next level. And that is a piece that not only the city does, but there's other community groups that do that. You know, the mentoring program that Reverend Malachi Walker has, Young Men, Inc., do an excellent job of mentoring our most at-risk youth and adolescents. So we have those kind of initiatives all over the city, in churches, in community centers that are working with our most vulnerable. Clean for Green on the Far East Side, which is a summer youth jobs program that Pastor James Jackson does. And they give young people money the day that they work. At the end of the workday, they're getting $20 or $25, and those kids have a little money in their pocket. And this is important because if they have a little money in their pocket, then they can go out and buy stuff rather than selling drugs or doing something even more violent in being involved in robberies that certainly can lead to more violence on the street. So those kind of initiatives try to address the issue of kids going hungry, or kids growing up in a home where there may not be food 3 times a day for them. For some kids, it's not 2 times a day. And for some kids, they struggle to get 1 meal a day. And that is the reality, and we're trying to address that. And many of our community groups are trying to address that with food pantries, and many of the churches that are providing meals during the week. And in some neighborhoods, we have a church that is providing a meal every day so that people who are hungry can go without that. The fourth thing that I want to talk about that I think has been very helpful is the role that the philanthropic community has played. And without their help, Lilly Endowment, CICF, the Central Indiana Community Foundation, and others, without those foundations helping to provide resources for these groups, I don't think we would have seen the kind of violence reduction that we have seen in 2025. Right now, we're at 62 homicides and 51 criminal homicides. It's a 30% reduction from where we were last year. When it comes to the murders, we were at 75 murders this time last year. Now we're only at 51. Dramatic decline. We were near 100 homicides last year at this time. We're at 62. Dramatic decline. I believe we can do better. I believe as long as we continue to work together in collaboration and partnership, IMPD is doing their part, along with other federal agencies, along with the U.S. Attorney's Office that is doing a great job in prosecuting repeat violent offenders with gun crimes. They're doing an excellent job. As long as the prosecutor's office continue and the courts holding repeat violent offenders accountable, and the village continues to do their work, and the philanthropic community continues to support that with resources, Indianapolis, I believe that we're headed for a big year this year. We have 6 more months to go, and I know that anything can happen, but I think we're on the right path. I don't know how the last 6 months are going to go, but I do think we're going to end up less than where we were in 2024, and we well may be on the way of getting back to the numbers that we were seeing in 1999 to 2012, when we averaged 96 murders a year and about 115 homicides a year. I believe we can get back to that number, and I believe that we can even do better than that. I believe that this is one of the best communities in the country. I do, when it comes to working together to address critical issues. And I think we have done that for decades now. I think we're hitting back in the right direction. And as long as we keep the politics out of this, I think you're going to see these numbers get even better and better. Our job is to make this city a safer place for all the residents. No matter what part of the city you're in, no matter what your neighborhood is, we ought to be doing our part to make it safe for you, your family, and for young people, for our children who live in these areas. Let's continue to work together. Let's continue to do our part. I think we can do this in Indianapolis. And I know some people are saying, well, we're in the summertime now and those numbers are going to go up. They may or they may not. I remember in 2010, from June through August, we only had 17 criminal homicides. 17, that's all we had. It was because of the remarkable work that was being done by the village. Everybody was doing their part. And if we keep the politics out of it, and I think that's what has hurt us in this city, the politics. We keep the politics out of it and allow neighborhood groups working hand in hand with the city and the police come up with the strategies for their particular part of the city. And as long as it's being undergirded and supported, then I believe that you're going to see reductions in violent crimes across the city. But we got to keep the politics out of it. I know some people don't like the frankness of a Reverend Harrison, but I'm frank for a reason. I'm able to talk about what I see, what I have experienced, what should be accepted, what should not be accepted. And what is unacceptable is high levels of violent crimes in this city. That's unacceptable. I'm not going to apologize for being vocal about that. And I know that when law enforcement, the city, the courts, the prosecutor's office, and neighborhood groups and anti-violence groups and grassroots organizations, when we work together, we get things done and violence goes down. When we understand that there is no one silver bullet to it, and it takes all of us as a part of the village, and even those of you who are listening to me on this podcast, you play a part in this too. When all of us are working together, we can dramatically bring down the level of violent crimes in this city. And regardless of who the mayor is or who's on the city council, the strategy ought to never change. We know what works. There are 3 components: prevention, intervention, and enforcement. When you are doing those 3 things effectively, you're going to have lower levels of violence. In the city of Boston, they have had decades of low levels of violent crimes, regardless of who the mayor was. Why? Because they understand that when you have initiatives that focus on prevention, intervention, and enforcement, you're going to produce lower levels of violent crimes. So whoever the mayor is and on the city county council, it should not change. The same groups that are doing it now, if they're willing to do it when we get a new mayor, then they ought to be supported. It is when we play politics with this is the reason violence got out of hand in Indianapolis. We should have never experienced almost 10 years of the highest level of homicides and shootings and stabbings in the history of this city. Should have never happened. Should have never happened. And we ought to all be vocal so that it does not happen again. We're heading in the right direction. I believe the numbers are going to continue to go down because politics is now out of it. and everybody's working together. When we all work together, there's lower levels of violence in the city. And if we continue to do that, then Indianapolis is going to be one of the safest cities in America. Along with, we are about to win the NBA championship. So we're going to be one of the safest cities in America, and we're going to be the home of the Indiana Pacers, the 2025 NBA champions. This is Reverend Harrison on Real Talk. I hope you enjoyed this podcast today, and I pray that you would share this podcast with others and join me. In the future, I'm hoping to have call-ins for people to call into the podcast, and we have conversation with one another. I'm going to continue to bring in more guests to my podcast as we talk about issues that affect the city of Indianapolis, the state of Indiana, and our nation. This is Reverend Charles Harrison, and I pray that you have a blessed and you have an awesome day. Peace.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast.
And be sure to check out other great podcasts on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Online now at allindianapodcast.com.